Hello, everyone, and welcome to our final AP Stats review session. And today is the day. So we're here. It is your AP Statistics exam day at 2 p.m. You will be taking the AP Statistics exam for 2020. And this is our last time together. So first, before we start, I just want to say how much I've enjoyed working with you this year and this semester. And I know we've went through some tough times, and we've had some struggles that we've had to deal with when going through and not going to our face-to-face schools and being online and just working through a new exam that we didn't know what was going on and the exam format changing. But through all of that, we persevered and we've made it to exam day. And now you get a chance to just show off what you know. So that's how I want you to approach this. From the perspective of you get the chance to show off and show everyone out there what you know about statistics. And that's going to be a lot from what we've done so far this year. So I'm going to take you through a brief just overview to kind of help you relax today and help you feel good about what's going on. So this is the AP Statistics 2020 Study Guide, and we're just going to look at a couple things. First of all, you guys know this year the format of the exam is going to look a little bit different. You know you'll have 45 minutes to take the exam, and really it's 50 minutes, so we'll go through that in a minute. And you know that these units are on the exam, only units 1 through 7. Units 8 and 9 were cut from the exam for this year. Okay, so what will the test look like? Question 1 will be a free response question. It will take approximately 25 minutes, and then you will have 5 minutes to upload, so you'll see 30 minutes total. And it will be worth 55% of your score. And we're guessing that there'll be 6 parts on this question number 1. And it's going to cover multiple units. Again, remember, one part of a question, A, B, C, D, E, F, one part of the question may have nothing to do with another part of the question, okay? So make sure you try each part equally. And then down here, this should say question number 2. It is 15 minutes, and it is worth 45% of your score. So we're expecting about 5 parts on that question, and it's going to cover 2 or more units, right? So in all, the 2 questions are going to cover all 7 units. And so each unit will at least have 1 part of a question. There's not an investigative task, which means there's not a long problem where it teaches you or where it expects you to do something that you did not learn in the course. So that's good. You should always print or keep open that AP Statistics formula sheet. And calculators are allowed, but they're not required. So you actually should be able to do this without a calculator, which makes us think that we may not have to actually run a test, but that we may be presented with the test statistics and have to make our conclusions from that. Okay, so the exam, you all know by now, is at 2 p.m. Eastern, wherever you're at. You will take that test online, and you need to jump in at 1:30. So at 1:30, it would be a nice time for you to go ahead and make sure you can log in to the exam by going to College Board and following the directions on your e-ticket, and that you're able to get in your information. So you're able to put in your personal information, and then you'll see that your computer's set up and you'll wait. If you're on a wireless network, I would ask that you try to make sure that others in your house are not on the network at the same time, if possible, just so that it doesn't disconnect or overload when you're trying to do the exam. And try to find a quiet space also, if possible, and let people know that from about 2 p.m. to 3 p.m., you need to be able to focus on what you're doing, okay? So let's go through each unit and just look through just the big takeaways from each unit one last time. What can we find and what can we look at? So Unit 1 is exploring one variable data. So in Unit 1, it's about creating and analyzing graphs of data. This includes categorical and quantitative data. For categorical data, you should be able to read and create tables and bar graphs, calculate proportions and percentages. For quantitative data, you should be able to read and create dot plots, stem plots, histograms, box plots. You should also be able to describe the shape, center, spread, and unusual features. So remember, that's SOX: shape, outlier, center, spread. Anytime they ask you to describe a distribution. This includes making calculations such as the mean, the median, the range, the IQR, and the standard deviation, which we can get from our calculator. Remember, going to stat edit and then going to stat calc, one variable stats. Our descriptions and calculations can be used to compare data from multiple groups. And finally, this ends with using the normal distribution. So if you remember, the normal curve is a 68, 95, 99.7 curve. Tells us that 68% of all data is within one standard deviation, 95% of all data is within two standard deviations, and 99.7% of all data is within three standard deviations. We also talk about percentiles. Remember, a percentile is the percent that you are above. So if you're at the 90th percentile, that means you scored higher than 90% of students. A z-score, remember, a formula for a z-score is x minus the mean divided by the standard deviation. And that is basically all for normal distribution in Unit 1. Okay, so let's move to Unit 2. Unit 2 is exploring two variable data, and the big takeaways for Unit 2 is about creating and analyzing graphs of data when two variables are measured about an individual data set. For categorical data, we should be able to read and create two-way tables. Remember, those are those tables with one thing going across and one going down, or segmented bar graphs. Those are the ones with different sections there. And calculate conditional percentages. So that's when you know something conditional. These can be used to comment on the association or no association between two variables. For quantitative data, we should be able to read, create, and describe scatter plots. And those can be used to comment on whether there's an association between your X and Y variables. Okay? The second half of Unit 2 then focuses on linear regression. And in linear regression, we can make predictions about one quantitative variable, which is usually our response variable, Y. And that's why we call it Y hat, because it is our prediction equation, using an explanatory variable, X. We should be able to use the least squares regression line, LSRL, to make these predictions and interpret several components of LSRLs. So the key is, can we interpret these things? And that would be the slope. Remember, the slope is for every one increase in X, Y is predicted to increase or decrease by this much. But remember, instead of X and Y, you have to use the context of the problem. And intercept, remember, the y-intercept is when X is 0. This is what Y is. And other calculated values such as S or R squared. Remember, R squared is the percent of data that is explained by the line, and then S as well. All right, so those are your big takeaways from Unit 2. All right, so let's go down to Unit 3, collecting data. Units 1 and 2 were about graphing and analyzing sets of data. Unit 3 is about examining the methods through which we can collect that data. So for sample surveys, you should be able to describe the various methods of selecting samples. And most of the methods that we look at are simple random samples, which may be called as an SRS. That's when everyone in the group, or everyone has an equal chance of being chosen, right? Stratified random samples, that's when you split them up into groups and then select a random sample from each group. Cluster samples, that's when you split them up into groups and then take a random sample of the entire group. And then systematic samples, that's when you have a system in place and you take every 5th person or every 10th person in line. Not all samples are collected, though, through a random process, and we should be prepared to discuss possible sources of bias, including whether something was not randomly selected, right? That can make things biased. We then turn to the differences between observational studies and experiments and the features of a well-designed experiment. We should be able to define many common terms associated with experiments. A lot of those you've probably seen in other courses and in science as well, and compare and contrast several common experimental designs. So a completely randomized design is one that you're typical of seeing. It's where you have volunteers, you randomly assign them to one or two of the 2 treatments, you give them the 2 treatments, and then you compare their results. A randomized block design is when you have volunteers, but then you realize that maybe there's a difference. Maybe males and females will react differently. So you block by gender, and you put the males, and you get half male, and you make sure you split the males into 2 groups. Then you get females, and you make sure you split the females into 2 groups. Then you make a conclusion for males and a separate conclusion for females. And then a matched pairs design is when you would do 2 things to one person. So but this person or the subject gets both treatments. So they may get the new drug and the placebo, and then it will be randomly flipped as to which one they get first. Okay, so they'll end up getting both treatments. They could also be a pre and post test. Those are matched pairs designs where you see their score on the pre-test and the post-test and things of that nature. So that is the big takeaways from Unit 3. Unit 4 takes us to one of the tougher units in AP Statistics, and that is probability distributions, okay? So in probability distributions, we're going to talk about probability and random variables, and that is in Unit 4 where it gets a little bit tricky, okay? So there are lots of calculations and formulas, but we're asked to calculate or interpret probabilities in a variety of settings, beginning with the understanding that probability reflects what we should expect to occur over the long run. It doesn't tell us this is what's going to happen, but it is the probability of it happening means this is what should be expected. That's why sometimes the mean is also called the expected value, right? So we should be able to design and execute simulations for a given scenario. So if we have a scenario that's 50-50, we should know that we can flip a coin. If we have a scenario where it might be 1 out of 6, we should know that we can roll a die, things like that. And then the calculations begin. We should be able to calculate the probability of multiple events using a variety of strategies. We have two-way tables, we have tree diagrams, and we possibly also have Venn diagrams. We should also be able to categorize different events as mutually exclusive, which means they cannot occur at the same time or simultaneously, or independent, which means one does not affect the other. So that knowing that one event has happened doesn't affect the probability of the other event happening. With justification. Conditional probability, which is A given B, plays a big role in this part of the unit. Shifting over to random variables, we should be able to calculate the mean, which is sometimes referred to as the expected value, or the standard deviation of a random variable, and combine them using similar rules in Unit 1. We conclude Unit 4 with a look at binomial and geometric. Remember, binomial PDF is when you need the exact probability. Binomial CDF is less than or equal to. Geometric PDF is when you need the exact probability, and geometric CDF is less than or equal to. And these are two special types of random variables that arise frequently, and that is Unit 4. So then we move to Unit 5, which is sampling distributions. And the big takeaways from Unit 5, Unit 5 basically provides the bridge. It's where we stop, and it provides this bridge into our inference, which is our hypothesis test and confidence intervals. So after reviewing normal distribution and doing things like that, we are going to then work with sampling distributions. So we start talking about the conditions that would be needed for inference. And these three conditions are that we have a random sample or random assignment, that we have a large enough sample, which means NP greater than or equal to 10, and N1 minus P greater than or equal to 10 if we're using proportions, or the central limit theorem, which says N is greater than or equal to 30 if we're dealing with means. So make sure you use the appropriate one depending on whether you're using proportions or means. And then independent observations, which is basically the 10% rule, which means our sample size must be less than 10% of the population. Another way of saying that is our population needs to be at least 10 times the size of our sample. If these three conditions are met, the sampling distribution will be approximately normal, and all of our formulas for calculating the mean and standard deviation on the formula sheet will hold. We can then build sampling distributions for sample proportions and sample means, and then for two proportions and for two means. And that's Unit 5. So it basically takes us through the conditions and setting up some of these confidence intervals and tests. Unit 6 is proportions. So now we're talking about proportions. So Unit 6 is where we meet confidence intervals and hypothesis tests for the first time. Specifically, we're going to be talking about Z intervals and Z tests for proportions. So remember, if we're dealing with proportions, we only have Z, right? We have one proportion Z interval, two proportion Z interval, one proportion Z test, and two proportion Z tests. So after learning the basics about confidence intervals, like what is a confidence level? What does that mean? That means 90, 95, 99%. What's a margin of error, which is how far, that's what comes after the plus or minus, right? It's how far you go up and how far you go down from your point estimate. We construct and interpret 1 and 2 sample Z intervals. These intervals, which are built from samples, can be used to justify claims about a population. After we explore that, we go to hypothesis tests, where we talk about how to write a null and alternate hypothesis. Remember, P equals, and then the alternate would be P is less than, or P is greater than, or P is not equal to the number you have in the null hypothesis. You run a 1 and 2 sample, or 2 proportion Z test. Finally, we start talking about errors. Remember, a type 1 error is when you reject the null hypothesis when it's really true, and a type 2 error is when you fail to reject the null hypothesis when it's really false and the alternate is true. And we define the power of a test. So the power of a test is the probability of correctly rejecting a false null hypothesis. So when you reject the null, the power of the test is the probability that you did that correctly. So we want the power of the test to be really high. One way we can make the power of the test really high is to get a large sample size, right? So the bigger our sample, the more power we have there. Okay, so let's move down to Unit 7. Our last one on the AP exam is inference for means. So we talk about inference for means. Unit 7 is an extension of Unit 6. So we basically do everything we did in Unit 6 for proportions again, but this time we're going to use T procedures. Remember, the only time with means you would use a Z would be if for some reason you had the population standard deviation. And I can almost assure you they're not going to give you the population standard deviation. So if you're doing a test or interval for means, you are almost guaranteed to be using a t-test or a t-interval, okay? We build confidence intervals and run hypothesis tests for a mean or a difference between two means. For the difference of two means, we must be able to distinguish if we're doing a two-sample procedure or a matched pairs procedure. So if it's matched pairs, then that matched pairs is when we only have one sample. So like we have 20 people and we look at their pre-test score and their post-test score. So we need to subtract those scores, and then we would only put the difference in list one of those scores. But if it's a two samples, if we have 25 students from one school and 25 students from another school, and we're looking at their scores, then we don't do matched pairs. That would be a two-sample t-test because we have two completely different samples. So the key is to look and see, do you have two different samples, or is this being done just from one sample? Okay, but that's going to be, you're going to want to use T when you talk about means. And all those can be done on your calculator as well. Couple other things you want to do. You want to make sure you have your TI-84 calculator. Either you have your calculator or you are able to get the download. Remember, education.ti.com had the free 6-month download of the TI-84 calculator for your computer. The other takeaways for the AP Statistics exam that we've talked about before, just to get you prepared as I finish this up, would be that you have, again, you have your e-ticket, some tips to avoid problems on exam day, okay? Update your browser and disable any plugins. So you want to be using Chrome if at all possible. Others can be used, you see here, but Chrome is the best. If you are submitting a photo, so if you're going to write your response and take a photo of a handwritten response, make sure your device is set up to capture JPEGs and not HEIC. And you can check that by going to Settings, by going to Camera, by going to Formats, and making it the most compatible, okay? Keep an eye on the time. Use the final 5 minutes of the exam, and when you see it get to 5 minutes, as I showed you in the demo, the timer is going to turn red. Then that is when you want to start attaching your responses. We strongly advise you not to wait till the last minute to attach your response, but I still think you should use all your time given until it turns red, right? Read the screen after you click submit. So once you've finished a question, it should confirm that you finished that question and you're now waiting for question number 2. Once you've successfully submitted question number 2, it should confirm that you submitted that question, and then it should say, congratulations, your AP exam is complete. If for some reason it says we did not receive your response, then that is the time where you would use the email to send them your response, and each person has a unique email they can send that to. This can lead to errors, so don't open an exam with the e-ticket on more than one device. So don't try to open it on your computer and also open the exam on another device as well. Only do it on one computer. And this could lead to errors because it may think you're at 2 different places, okay? So those are all the things that you need to look at for exam day. Your information, so if we updating the exam process, to submit your response, remember you had 3 options. And then to be prepared for exam day, let me go through this with you really quick. For AP Statistics, you can go to the course-specific information. There is an AP Statistics formula sheet and table, so you can click that and download that to your computer. And there is also a keyboarding tip sheet if you're typing the exam for how you would put in some of the most common symbols in AP Statistics, how you would type those into your response for those exams. And then you're also obviously allowed to use a calculator, which you can use the online calculator or your own handheld calculator as well, okay? So that's the things specifically for AP Statistics. The other things that you want to do is review the exam day checklist. You would like to write your 8-character, your 8-digit AP ID, write the name of your exam, the exam date, the start time, and your check-in time, which would be 1:30. And then make sure that you're ready to test by going through all these things. You have the exam e-ticket, You've checked that it's for this exam, your device is plugged in, you know you're using Chrome or one of the supported browsers. You've practiced with the exam demo. If you're typing your exam, you've already opened a Google Doc or a Word doc, and you've already typed your 8-digit AP ID and the initials at the top of it. Because remember, those need to be at the top of every page. If I'm handwriting my exam, I've already prepared a set of pages, and I've written my 8-digit ID and my initials at the top of each page and the page number, right? I've reviewed the list of required materials that I just went over with you. The exam security guidelines, that just means during the exam, you're not communicating with anyone else taking the AP exam. This is just you. You can use your notes. You can Google search. You can do things like that. But you really just need to focus on what you know and what you feel very strongly about. If you're at home, you've asked others to not disturb you or use any devices that may mess up the exam or the bandwidth that you need. If you've, let me move down. You're in a location, your device can access Wi-Fi or cellular data. You're in a location with no or limited background noise, so you got that. And then during the exam, you know you should not refresh your browser or use the back arrow. You're going to keep the exam question open on your device so you can see the timer. When a time's almost up, you're going to submit your response. If you don't submit your response, remember you'll get 0 points for that question, so you want to make sure you submit it. If you accidentally close the browser or tab or lose internet connection, you can get your exam ticket back and you can rejoin your exam. If too much time went by, then there is a makeup exam form, but that, you know, the makeup exam is 2 weeks later and is completely different questions as well. Okay. Also, make sure if you sign into My AP, you can indicate what college, university, or scholarship program you want to get your free score report. The deadline to do that is June 20th. After June 20th, it is not free anymore. And then obviously there will be no cheating going on during this, okay? So I've gone through everything, and we have gone through this semester every possible thing that could be on the AP Statistics exam. We've done a practice AP Statistics exam as well, and we're set for what's next, okay? So so at this point, I would just sit back, relax, feel confident in what you know, and take this time as an opportunity to show everyone what you do know and to have the opportunity and the chance to earn college credit for this course. So don't be nervous. Don't be upset if you don't understand one part of the question. Just show what you know, work through it, answer the questions thoroughly, use the vocabulary that we've learned throughout the course, and definitely take your time, right? Because you cannot move to question number 2 until all the time has expired. So everybody will move to question number 2 at the same time. So take all your time you have on question number 1, take all the time you have on question number 2. When you see the timers turn red, make sure you hit submit. Really enjoyed this year. I've learned a lot having to be online and changing up things, and I hope you've learned a lot, and I hope it's been an enjoyable experience for you. I hope that not only do you pass this exam, but my main hope for you is that you learn statistics for the rest of your life, and that you'll remember this class and remember things that you learned in this class as you're going through your life the rest of the way. So I wish you the best, and I've really enjoyed just being a part of your education, and I hope you do well. I know all of you will, but I also hope you do well and that you continue to succeed and do great things in life as well outside of the classroom. So if you need me at any time, you can reach out to me even after you're gone from Lincolnton High School, and I really have appreciated everything, and I'll see you guys later. Good luck on your exam, and do the best you can, okay? Thanks.